And there really wasn't that much in our house. We just had a small yard. It was wintertime anyway. My dad wouldn't have been puttering on the yard anyway. And there really wasn't, television wasn't there. And he and my mother got along very well. So under those conditions, I was born about 9 months later. So I didn't notice at the time that the market was closed. But the stock market had actually recovered over 20% during that 9.5-month period or thereabouts. People did not think in the fall of 1930, they did not think they were in a Great Depression. They thought it was a recession very much like had occurred at least a dozen times, although not always when stock markets were important. But we'd had many recessions in the United States over the time, and this did not look like it was something dramatically out of the ordinary. Actually, for about 10 days after my birth, the stock market actually managed to go up all of 1 or 2% there in those 10 days. Well, from that point, the stock market went from level of 240 to 41, which was a noticeable decline because if somebody had given me $1,000 on the day I was born and I'd bought stocks with it and bought the Dow average, my $1,000 would have become $170 in less than 2 years. That is something that none of us here ever experienced. That we may have had it with one stock occasionally, but in terms of having a broad range of America marked down 83% in 2 years and marked down 89% of the peak, it was in September 3rd, 1929, was extraordinary. And in that intervening period, less than 1 year after I was born, just slightly less than 1 year, my dad went to the bank where he worked and had his account, and of course, the bank had a sign on it closed, and so he had no job. He had 2 kids at that point. His father had a grocery store, but Charlie and I both worked for my grandfather. Charlie worked there in 1940. I worked there in 1941, so we didn't know each other. But my grandfather said to my father that, don't worry about your groceries, Howard. He says, I'll just let your bill run. That was my grandfather. Not exactly. He cared about his family, but he wasn't going to go crazy. One of the things as I look back on that period, and I don't think the economists generally like to give it that much of a point of importance, but if we'd had the FDIC started on January 1st, 1934. It was part of the sweeping legislation that took place when Roosevelt came in. But if we'd had the FDIC, we would have had a much different experience, I believe, in the Great Depression. People blame it on Smoot-Hawley, and there's all kinds of things, and the margin requirements in 29, and all of those things entered into creating a recession. But if you have over 4,000 banks fail, that's 4,000 local experiences where people save and save and save, put their money away, and then someday they reach for it and it's gone. And that happens, in all 48 states, and it happens to your neighbors, and it happens to your relatives. It has to have an effect on the psyche that's incredible. So one very, very, very good thing that came out of the Depression, in my view, is the FDIC. And it would have been a somewhat different world, I'm sure, if the bank failures hadn't just rolled across this country and with people that thought that they were savers found out that they had nothing when they went there, and there was a sign that said closed. So the Great Depression went on and lasted a very long time, but it lasted a lot longer in the minds of people than it did actually in its effects. World War II came along, and on sort of an involuntary manner, we adopted Keynesianism. We started running fiscal deficits, of course, that were absolutely huge, and took our debt up to a percentage of GDP, which had never reached before and never have reached since. So we had an enormous economic recovery, but the minds of people had been so scarred, the memories. Parents told their children. 1929 became a symbol in people's minds. I mean, if you said 1929, it was like saying 1776 or 1492. I mean, everybody knew exactly what you were talking about, and it affected stock prices in a rather remarkable way. It was January 4th of 1951 that the kid who was born on August 30th in 1930 had finished college before the stock market got back to where it was at that earlier time. So take the years from 1920, 1929 to 1951. And bear in mind that, the country was only 140 years